Hello and welcome to this preview video of Beowulf, lines 1914 to 2199 from Maria Headley's excellent translation of the poem. And this is in a series of sort of quirky passages and sections of Beowulf. This is one that I think most readers are going to be tempted to skim. And I always say, in the hands of any book, but particularly a great book, when you're tempted to skim, go more deliberately, pay closer attention. The poem I share in the beginning of class is a poem about remembering an experience in battle, and it's by one of my favorite contemporary poets, Yusef Komunyakaa, who's an Army veteran in Vietnam and served, and he has a poem called Grenade, definitely worth checking out. And I think the overarching thing I'd like, rather than go through kind of step by step, moment to moment, what happens in this segment, I think we're at a place now in the book where we know how this poem moves. We know it doesn't move forward in a line, plot point A to plot point B to plot point C. I think we're aware that the poem stops and starts a lot, that a moment or an image or an event will remind the speaker of a former warrior or a former villain. And the poem kind of moves in a circular fashion. So I think we're aware of that now, and we know not to panic when we might be lost in the middle of a tangent. The core of this section of the poem is repetition. Beowulf returns home to Geatland from Denmark, from Hrothgar's keep, and he reunites with his own king, who's also his kinsman, Hygelac. And there's an interesting sort of tone about their reuniting that's worth paying attention to. But because the Geats and Hygelac don't have a copy of the poem Beowulf, they haven't been reading with us, they don't know what's been going on. So Beowulf gets to tell his version of entering into Heorot, his version of meeting Hrothgar, his version of the Grendel battle, his version of the Grendel's mother battle, his version of the hospitality of the Danes. And I guess the thing I'd like you to pay the most attention to, and different readers are going to notice different things, frankly, how is Beowulf's story of his stay with the Danes similar and different to the poet's version of the story? It is different. Moreover, pay attention to any details that are new. Beowulf names some characters that haven't been named yet. Beowulf mentions some quirky details within the battle recollections that haven't been mentioned yet. So they're kind of interesting to talk about. But anyway, this is, I think, overarching. This is what I would pay closest attention to, is the difference between like a first-person account of the story versus what may or may not be a more objective account. Okay. I love this picture. So just a thought, the beginning of his recollection of his battle starts around 1925. And we get from 1925 to 1962, we begin 1925, Hygd, his queen, was young but shrewd. Okay, so we have returned. We've returned to, Beowulf has returned to Geatland, and we know that his queen is Hygd. So we're kind of in the moment. And immediately in 1932, we enter into a tangent. And this is a tangent that I have the sense that the original audience would know the character of the woman Modrith. And Modrith was sort of a quintessential female villain. And for a whole page, up until 1963, is a tangent comparing Beowulf's queen Hygd to the evil queen Modrith, that they're not like each other. So it's ultimately a long sort of compliment based on a tangent that the audience would be familiar with. So just so you know. Now, if you go to 1987, Um, Hygelac, his king, all the way to 19, all the way to the bottom of that page. Listen to how Hygelac welcomes Beowulf home. He says, "Holy hell, Beowulf." This is 1987 on page 86. "Holy hell, Beowulf. How did it go out there? You left with hardly a word. You hide yourself over water to defend a hall not your home. Heorot. And Hrothgar, did you help him? We know his woes, and to be honest, I thought them insoluble." And I would just bracket out that whole paragraph, pay attention to. Plot-wise, it's not hard to follow. Pay attention to tone, attitude, and that's probably worth discussing. It's not the warm welcome home that you'd expect a hero to receive. Beowulf's version of the story begins on line 2000, and it goes to it travels for the next several pages. Then we get, and this is another place where it's easy to get lost. We know that the Danes' general enemies, we see on line 2032, the Danes' general enemies are the Heathobards. So Beowulf almost becomes like Hrothgar here, in my opinion. He's almost like getting older, even while being like chronologically younger. He's becoming more wise. He takes any sort of moment of heroism, like the moment he's in right now, he's returning a conquering hero, right? And he's remembering history, and he's connecting that to what will come in the future. And he says in 2032, we can predict how the Heathobards will react, every loyal thane there. And he sort of goes through a series of sort of predictions, which is peppered with history. Please listen to me. This is a really easy section to get lost in and frustrated in. Be aware, though, that we're listening to Beowulf talk to his king about his experiences. And some of those experiences are connected to the history of the Danes, not just the history having to do with Beowulf, but a deeper, more further back history. And then Beowulf takes that history and projects it into the future. So it's a really, really interesting way of discussing things. He ends up returning to the story. It's a question to pay really close attention to. What do you think of Beowulf's tone with his king here? When Beowulf meets Hrothgar, foreign king, he has to be incredibly deferential and soft-spoken and almost formulaic and humble. Pay attention to what you think Beowulf's tone with his own king is. And also, by now, take like a 20,000 foot view, something that might be worth thinking about or writing about or discussing in a class. How is this poem treating the idea of how people speak to each other? In other words, what determines how people talk to each other? Deference and respect, an arrogant sort of bravado, or something in between? What do you notice in this section of the poem? I'm not sort of hyper analyzing every moment. There are just lots of moments in Beowulf's account of his story that are not included in the earlier version. What is it? Is it the name of characters, like I said before? Is it the fact, and I'll spot you one because it's cool. If you have a flexible medieval definition of cool, go to line 2080. 2080. It's on page 90. This is just a little section. This is Beowulf recounting his battle with Grendel. Let me be clear, he says to Hygelac, Beowulf says. Grendel ate him up. So Grendel eats one of Beowulf's comrades. The attacker's teeth were bloody, but his face strewn with gobbets, his body swollen with evil, and still he wasn't finished feasting, but insisted on leaving the golden hall with more harvest. Again, I'm reading this aloud, so bracket this in your book, right? Grendel was famous for his heft. He extended hands then for none other than your boy. He had your boy being Beowulf, right? He had a huge sack. This is the new information. He had a huge sack hanging from his shoulder, stitched with sinew, clasped with clever workings, crafted of twisted dragon skins. So this, I mean, from what I've read of this sort of quirky detail, some consider it an offshoot of sort of elvish lore that they would carry sacks to put their victims in or whatever. But I think it's a curious detail that Grendel's sort of bag, where maybe he would put body parts to feast on, was made of dragon skins, particularly in light of what dragons symbolize in this world and in this poem. But there's lots of little nuggets like this that Beowulf includes that we haven't heard before, in the story we've heard before. So what do you notice in this section of the poem? And I think a great way to begin a class of this section of the poem is to maybe list on the board or online all the observations of what Beowulf includes that stand out to us. I hope this preview video helps in this very strange section of the poem, and good luck with your reading.